Hello everyone, I'm Sanchita Sharma and today we are going to discuss the NCRT solutions of the chapter The Address. Question number 1 is Have you come back? Said the woman. I thought that no one had come back. Does the statement give some clue about the story? If yes, what is it? Here the mentioned woman is Mrs. Darling when she said the statement to the narrator when the narrator comes for the first time. Yes, the statement gave some clue about the story. During the early part of the war, Mrs. Darling had shifted the important belongings of her acquaintance, Mrs. S., from her house to 46 Marconi Street. Acquaintance means a person that you know, not a close friend. These included table silverwares, antique plates, and other nice things such as iron Hanukkah candle holder, woolen tablecloth, and green knitted cardigan with woodland buttons. Since Mrs. S had died during the war, Mrs. Darling did not expect anyone to come back and claim her costly belongings, as she thought no one else knew her address. The statement indicates the greedy and possessive nature of Mrs. Darling. Greedy means wanting more, wanting something more than you really need it. And possessive means not wanting to share something. Mrs. Darling was possessive and greedy because she does not want to share those belongings with someone else. She does not want anyone to come and claim those belongings. That's why she was not ready to let the narrator into the house. She did not open the door to the daughter of her former acquaintance, nor did she show any signs of recognition. Recognition means the fact that you can identify somebody. She did not let the girl in. She refused to see her, then saying it was not convenient for her to do so. Convenient means suitable for a particular person, not causing difficulty. So when she was saying it is not convenient, she does not want to let her in, and that's why she was saying that it is not suitable for coming in. The narrator had gone to this address with a specific purpose to see her mother's belongings. Even when she told Mrs. Darling that only she had come back, the woman with broad back did not soften a bit. The statement means that when the narrator told her that only she had come back means that she is the only living being in a family. The woman with broad back did not soften a bit means that she did not show any kind of sympathy towards the narrator. She was not caring towards the narrator. Thus, the clash of interest is hinted at by the aforesaid statement. Aforesaid means said or mentioned earlier, the statement that is mentioned earlier. Here are some pictures of those belongings we are talking about in the previous answer silverware and candle holder and antique plates. Next question is the story is divided into pre war and post war times. What hardships do you think the girl underwent during these times? Answer. During the pre war times, the narrator lived in some other city far away from home, and she visited her mother only for a few days. During the first half of the war, the narrator's mother was always afraid that they might have to leave the place and lose all valuable belongings. The narrator lived in the city in a small rented room. Its windows were covered with black-out paper. She could not see the beauty of nature outside her room. The threat of death loomed large. Loomed means to appear in a way that is not clear or seemed frightening. So here, the narrator was talking about her experience before war and during war times. So she talked about how she lived far away from her home and she came to her home just for a few days. And in those few days, Uh, when she talked to her mother told her about the address, and that her mother always was always afraid that they have to leave the home and they could not bring all the belongings with them. That's why they were afraid to lose all the belongings. Then the narrator talked about how she's living in a small rented room and she could not see outside of a window. She could not enjoy her freedom. After the liberation, liberation is the act of freeing someone from another's control, or basically freedom. So after the liberation, everything became normal again. Bread was getting to be a lighter color. She could sleep in her bed without any fear of death. She could glance out of the window of her room each day. One day she was eager to see all the possessions of her mother, which she knew was stored at number 46 Marconi Street. She went to that address. She felt disappointed when Mrs. Darling neither recognized her nor let her in. She asked her to come again some day. It was evident she wanted to put her off. She was eager to see, touch, and remember her mother's possessions. So she had to take the trouble of visiting the place again. Question number 3. Why did the narrator of the story want to forget the address? Its answer is the narrator remembered the address her mother had told her only once. It was number 46 Marconi Street. Her mother's acquaintance, Mrs. Darling, lived there. She had stored the valuable belongings of narrator's mothers there. After her mother's death, the narrator had an urge to visit the place. She wanted to see those things, touch them, and remember. She went to the given address twice. She was successful in the second attempt to enter the living room. She found herself in the midst of things she wanted to see again. It means she found herself in the middle of the things she wanted to see again. She felt oppressed in the strange atmosphere. Oppressed here means uncomfortable. So the narrator felt uncomfortable in the strange environment. Everything was arranged in a tasteless way. The ugly furniture and the muggy smell that hung there seemed quite unpleasant. Muggy smell here means a place which is damp and close. So the was not good and fresh. These objects evoked the memory of the familiar life of former time. Evoke means to produce a memory of feeling in somebody. But they had lost their value since they had been separated from her mother and stored in strange surroundings. She no longer wanted to see, touch, or remember these belongings. She resolved to forget the address. She wanted to leave the past behind and decided to move on. This is the picture of the house located at the address number 46 Marconi Street. Question number 4. The address is a story of human predicament that follows war. Comment. Answer. The war creates many difficult and unpleasant situations for human beings. Sometimes it becomes difficult to know what to do. The human predicament that follows war is amply illustrated through the experience of the narrator. The war had caused many physical difficulties as well as emotional sufferings to her. She had lost her dear mother. She went to 46 Marconi Street to see her mother's valuable possessions. How greedy and callous human beings can become is exemplified by the behavior of Mrs. Darling. She had stored all the valuable belongings of narrator's mother, but she refused to recognize the narrator. She did not even let her in. Callous human beings means not caring about the feelings of others. So, when the narrator went to the address to find her mother's belonging, to remember her mother, the Mrs. Darling did not let her come in, and she was not caring enough. She did not care about the feelings of narrator. The presence of her mother's possessions in straight atmosphere pained her. Now these valuables had lost all importance for her as they had been separated from her mother. She could not get solace or comfort from them. Solace is a person or a thing that makes you feel better when you are sad or depressed. So she could not get the comfort she used to get from those things. She was there just for that comfortable feeling. But when she saw all those things arranged in a tasteless way, she just wants to forget the address because she does not want to come here again. She does not want to see those things again. Extra questions. Question number one: how did Mrs. Darling react when the narrator said, I am Mrs. S. daughter? Mrs. Darling held her hand on the door as if she wanted to prevent it opening any further. Her face showed no sign of recognition. She kept staring at the narrator without uttering a word. The situation described here is about narrator's first visit to the address. When the narrator said that I am your acquaintance daughter, Mrs. Darling showed no recognition. She does not want to let the narrator in, so she kept a hold on the door and she did not open a bit. Question number two: who had given the narrator the address, when, and under what circumstances? The narrator's mother had given her the address years ago during the first half of the war. The narrator came home for a few days and missed various things in the room. Then her mother told her about Mrs. Darling and gave her the address. Here we are talking about pre war times when the narrator was living far away from home and she came home for only few days. She notices some things missing and she asked her mother about her. And then her mother told her about her acquaintance. Question number three: what did the narrator learn about Mrs. Darling from her mother? Mrs. Darling was an old acquaintance of the narrator's mother. The latter had not seen her for several years. Then she suddenly turned up and renewed their contact. Every time she left the place, she took something with her: table silver, antique plates, etc. This was the first impression Mrs. Darling left on narrator. I was in a room I knew and did not know, says the narrator in the story, The Address. What prompted her to make this observation? This is question number 4. Answer is, the narrator found herself in middle of things she was familiar with and which she did not want to see again. However, when she found them in a strange atmosphere where everything was arranged in a tasteless way, the ugly furniture and the muggy smell created the feeling that she didn't know the room. Well, she wanted to see those things because those things belonged to her mother. She thought she will feel comfortable when she touched those things. But when she found herself in middle of those things which are arranged in a tasteless way, she found herself uncomfortable. The ugly furniture and the muggy smell created the feeling that she didn't know the room. Question number 5: how did the narrator conclude that she was right? Here, the question is talking about when the narrator met Mrs. Darling in her first visit to the address. Mrs. Darling told her that she did not recognize her, but the narrator was sure that this is the right address. The answer is the woman was wearing the green knitted cardigan of the narrator's mother. The wooden buttons were rather pale from washing. She saw that the narrator was looking at the cardigan. She half hid herself again behind the door. Her reaction convinced the narrator that she was right. The narrator observed the woman wearing her mother's cardigan. She remembered her mother's cardigan, and when she saw the woman wearing it, she was sure that that's the woman. And when she saw that the woman hid herself behind the door, when she saw the woman's reaction, she was sure that this is the right address. Question number 6. What reason did Mrs. Darling give for taking away the precious belongings of the narrator's mother? Mrs. Darling suggested to the narrator's mother that she should store her belongings at a safer place. She wanted to save all her nice things. She explained that they would lose everything if they had to leave the place. Well, it was time of the war, and Netta's mother was afraid that they will have to leave the place any time. So her acquaintance, Mrs. Darling, suggested to keep those things safe. And because they were afraid that they have to leave the place at any time, then they might lose those things. So the narrator mother agreed with Mrs. Darling. Question number 7. What does the narrator remember about Mrs. Darling as she saw her for the first time? We are talking about the first impression of Mrs. Darling creates a narrator. Mrs. Darling was a woman with broad back. She wore a brown coat and a shapeless hat. She picked up a heavy suitcase lying under the coat rack and left their house. She lived at number 46 Marconi Street. Question number 8. Why did the narrator wait a long time before going to the address number 46 Marconi Street? Initially, after the liberation, she was not at all interested in her mother's belongings lying stored there. She was also afraid of being confronted with things that had belonged to her mother, who was now no more. The narrator was afraid to face all those belongings because they might evoke a memory of past and her mother. And because her mother is no more, she was afraid of facing those feelings. Question number 9. How did the narrator come to know about Mrs. Darling and the address where she lived? Answer. Years ago, during the first half of the war, the narrator went home for a few days to see her mother. After staying there a couple of days, she noticed that something or other about the room had changed. She mixed various things. Then her mother told her about Mrs. Darling. She was an old acquaintance of her mother. She had suddenly turned up after many years. Now she came regularly and took something home with her every time she came. She suggested that she could save her precious belongings by storing them at her place. Mother told her address, number 46 Marconi Street. The narrator asked her mother if she had agreed with her that she should keep everything. Her mother did not like that. She thought it would be an insult to do so. She was worried about the risk Mrs. Darling faced while carrying a full suitcase or a bag. Here we are talking about when the narrator came home for a few days and she notices that many things are missing. When she asked her mother explained her that because of safekeeping those belongings, Mrs. Darling is going to take all those things with her. The narrator was afraid and she asked her mother, "Are you not afraid that she will keep all those things for herself?" The narrator thought it is an insult of Mrs. Darling and she does not like the statement. Question number 10. Comment on the significance of the title of the story, The Address. Answer. The title of the story, The Address, is quite apt. Apt means appropriate or suitable in a circumstance. It is the spring wheel of the action. In fact, the whole action centers around it. The title is quite suggestive and occurs at the beginning, middle, and the end of the story. Margaminko focuses the reader's attention on it by narrator's doubt whether she was mistaken or her self assurance that she had reached the correct address. The middle part of the story reveals how she came to know that the address it was her mother who informed her about the place where Mrs. Darling lived and asked her to remember it. The story ends dramatically with the narrator's resolve to forget the address. The wheels comes full circle. She had remembered the address for so many years, and now, since the belongings of her mother stored there have lost their usefulness, she finds that forgetting this address would be quite easy. The wheels comes full circle means the narrator's mother told her to remember the address. She went to the address, she remembers it after so many years, but after going to the address, she thought that it is good enough to forget about the address. So the wheel comes full circle. Question number 11. Give a brief account of the narrator's first visit to 46 Marconi Street. The answer is in the post pre war period, when things return to normal, the narrator becomes curious about her mother's possessions that were stored at Mrs. Darling's house. Since she wanted to see them, she took the train and went to 46 Marconi Street. Mrs. Darling opened the door a chink. The narrator came closer, stood on the step, and asked her if she still knew her. Mrs. Darling told her that she didn't know her. The narrator told her that she was the daughter of Mrs. S. Mrs. Darling kept staring at her in silence and gave no sign of recognition. She held her hand on the door as if she wanted to prevent it opening any further. The narrator recognized the green knitted cardigan of her mother that Mrs. Darling was wearing. Mrs. Darling noticed it and half hid herself behind the door. The narrator asked again if she knew her mother. Mrs. Darling asked with surprise if she had come back. She declined to see the narrator or help her. At first, when the narrator went to the address, Mrs. Darling, Mrs. Darling refused to recognize her. She does not want her to come in. That's why she kept hold on the door. After a long discussion, she recognized her, but she declined to help her or let her in. She said that it is not appropriate to come in. This is the picture of the cardigan, the green hand knitted cardigan, and the wooden buttons. Question number 12. What impression do you form of the narrator? Answer. The narrator leaves a very favorable impression on us about her emotional and intellectual qualities. Intellectual means ability to think in a logical way. So the narrator always thinks in a logical way. We find her an intelligent but devoted daughter. Why she is a devoted daughter? Because she remembers the address for so many years and she went to the address by catching a train just for her mother. She loves and respects her mother, but does not approve of her soft behavior towards her acquaintance, Mrs. Darling. Because her mother easily believes Mrs. Darling, that's why she does not approve of her soft behavior. She puts a pointed question which her mother thinks is impolite. The narrator has a keen power of observation. She notices during a brief stay at home that various things are missing from the room. She has a sharp power of judgment. She once sizes up Mrs. Darling. Her persistent efforts to remind Mrs. Darling of her own identity and the latter's relations with her mother reveal her indominant spirit. Indominate means impossible to defeat or subdue. She visits 46 Marconi Street twice to see, touch, and remember her mother's belonging. She is a realist who doesn't like to remain tagged to the past. Her resolution to forget the address and move on shows her grit and forward looking nature. Resolution means the quality of being firm and determined, and grit means courage. So the narrator was quite courageous to forget about the address. She was determined to forget about the address. She has a progressive personality. Now our chapter is finished. Thank you.